Hello and welcome. Today we're taking a look at the Suppressor Spec VZ61 Skorpion barrel being made by Bowman/Excalibur 3D. They did not pay me. I bought these barrels with my own money because I needed them for my own projects. But it gives me an opportunity to talk about why this barrel is different and my experience with it, as well as some of the facts around adding a suppressor to a VZ61 Skorpion, because it's not as straightforward as it otherwise could be in a perfect world. So starting with what exactly is it? So it's a threaded VZ61 barrel, nitrided. The whole thing with it is that it's 1 inch longer than the surplus length barrels. So the original Skorpion was a 4.5 inch barrel roughly, and the suppressor spec is 1 inch longer than that. What that gives you is the ability to fold the stock and have your suppressor attached no matter what attachment method you're using. I don't have an SBR VZ61 Skorpion, so I'm using this stub of a receiver here. But still, with that in place, this is where the stock would fall. And so it gives you 1 extra inch of clearance. And basically, no matter what muzzle device you end up using, whether that's 3-lug or direct thread, you have plenty of clearance so that you can mount whatever you need. That is its whole gimmick. That's what it does. On the original, the folding stock basically comes all the way out to the end. That was purposefully meant to be compact, which means with this barrel installed, it will not fit in the leather holster. That just does not leave you barely enough room to have some threads. But if you have a big chunkin suppressor that's trying to fit on the end of that, the suppressor is going to be in the way of you actually being able to install the stock. So that's the trick. That's the one thing that this really does and excels at, and why it's suppressor spec, is that with the suppressor attached, you can still fold the stock no matter what you're using. It does not have a shoulder, just like all the other 1/2x28 barrels that are meant for surplus VZ61 uppers. Therefore, a base-mounted muzzle device is the best course of action. Things like 3-lug, yeah, you can use it, but you're kind of just in the wind. You can't torque it down the way that you're supposed to, and that's less than ideal, but you certainly can use it. I will admit, it does look a little funky. That's a whole lot of extra sticking out the front there. You can also see what that would look like with direct thread, and it gives you plenty of room to actually still use the original stock. Or one use case I can definitely see for this is if you do leave it as a pistol, but you install a stock disable kit so that the stock has to be permanently affixed forward. Well, then you could actually do whatever you wanted out here on the front end without any worry about it being in the way. So that's a thought and a potential use case that I think that this will meet well. Now, the issues that each of the barrels gave me were actually different, and they both related to installation. So one of them, I actually had to chase the slot in the barrel with a 3mm bit through the holes in the trunnion in order to get it all to line up so that I could actually pin it. The pin would not seat with the factory cut slot in the barrel. It just didn't line up, and once I chased it, it worked fine. The problem I had with the second barrel was, while it installed wonderfully, almost a little too easy, it was actually a little bit loose when I would install a suppressor. So when I installed a suppressor, it got a bit more leverage and torque on it, trying to tighten down the suppressor, then it would actually rotate the barrel a little bit inside of the trunnion. I solved that by using a center punch to go around the ring on the barrel where the barrel interfaces with the trunnion, and to rough it up a little bit, essentially, so that there was just a hair more material, so that when it was hammered into the trunnion, then it would stay seated and in place and have a little bit more friction to hold it in, as well as the pin to prevent it from rotating. Additionally, I had initial feeding issues with both barrels when just hand cycling. This appears to be a fairly common issue with aftermarket VZ61 barrels regardless of manufacturer, and was easily remedied with a little polish and a Dremel. Essentially, the feed ramp on the barrel has too sharp of a wall that I smoothed out, and then the very top of the chamber where the extractor slot is located was too sharp of an edge. It would catch the lip of the cartridge as it tried to make the transition from the mag to the chamber. A little polish took care of that issue as well, so the cartridges could easily slide into the chamber without any catches. So unfortunately, it seems to be one of those things that requires a little bit of DIY, but if you're not afraid of doing that, then it certainly can be done. So with that being said, I want to talk about some of the other options that are out there and ways of getting a suppressor onto a VZ61. So Checkpoint is probably the most turnkey out of the box solution. Their way of doing it involved actually using a different size trunnion. So their barrels are beefier and their trunnion has a larger hole so that they can actually install the barrels, because you do have to install them from the rear here. It has to go through that trunnion. And with that, because they increase the size of this trunnion, they can actually increase the diameter of the barrel and have enough room to cut 1/2x28 threads and still have a shoulder. That's fundamentally why basically every barrel that is for a surplus parts kit is restricted by this diameter. This diameter is not even 1/2 inch, and because of that, 1/2x28 barely gives you threads, and then a shoulder on top of that is just asking too much, because the barrel itself is, 4.6, and it's got to go through a 0.48. Much more than that doesn't leave you enough room to have a proper shoulder. And that's exactly why none of them have it. So that's the commercial spec. And then the reason that all of the surplus spec don't have a shoulder is because the trunnion itself. There are a few that do have a shoulder, and they achieve that by threading the barrel not 1/2x28,
but by 12x1 metric with an adapter to 1/2x28.
The way that they were doing it is essentially the same way that people do it with 22 LR barrels. So you have a very small barrel, and then you have an adapter that is threaded, and then a step up to get to your 1/2x28 and your actual shoulder.
But those barrels are not nearly as readily available.
And then of course the third option is the original barrel, non-threaded. So there's a very famous picture of a Yugoslavian soldier with a VZ61 with a suppressor, and I believe it's using essentially a collet style suppressor, so like a drill. It's teeth that are tightened down around the barrel.
But those are not exactly available to us normal civilians here in the US.
And that is the suppressor spec VZ61 barrel. I think they're fine. If the only other option that's in stock is RTI, then I would definitely say get this one.
Or if you have a particular need to run the stock folded all the time or the majority of the time, especially if you have a suppressor attached, then this certainly meets that need.
Hopefully this was useful or at least informative. Thank you for tuning in, and I'll see you next time.